Good morning, fifth grade. Today we're going to start on Chapter 1, Lesson 5, which is the last lesson of Chapter 1. So we're almost finished with this. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We have, how did the eastern woodlands impact the lives of early people? Go ahead and zoom in for you so we can read it. All right, terrain and climate of the eastern woodlands. The eastern woodlands stretch from the Mississippi River to the Atlantic Ocean. In the past, most of this area was covered in thick forests. Since the eastern woodlands cover a large area, the early peoples of the region were often very different from one another. The seasons often guided how the people of the eastern woodlands lived. During the winter, men hunted game such as deer, bear, rabbits, beavers, and wild turkeys. During spring, the soil was ideal for growing crops. In summer, men fished, carved canoes, and built homes, while women gathered berries and wild plants. In autumn, the people gathered, dried, and stored the crops for the winter. After the harvest, they let the land rest for several years before replanting the crops. They used different land the next year. The large area of the eastern woodlands can be divided into two regions, the northeast and the southeast. The southeast was more thinly wooded and had a mild climate and a long growing season. These conditions were good for farming. The thicker forest of the northeast made farming more challenging. There, many peoples practiced a type of farming called slash and burn. They cut down and burned the trees in the forest, and the ash from the burned vegetation helped to make the soil fertile. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the map on this page. So everything that's in green are those eastern woodlands, being that is the eastern part of the United States. And then we said they separated between the northeastern, so the northern part, and then the southeastern, the southern part. All right, so the northeastern were more heavily wooded. That's where they did the slash and burn. They were able to cut down trees, burn them, and then let that soil get better for farming. So it would put more nutrients back into the soil. Whereas the southern woodlands, where it's warmer at most of the year, they had a longer growing season and they were able to grow more crops longer times of the year. So let's continue with the people of the southeast woodlands. Among the Native American groups that lived in the southeast woodlands were the Creek, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Catawba, Natchez, and Choctaw. Each group had its own unique customs and traditions. In both the southeast and the northeast, people ate a variety of farmed, hunted, and gathered foods, including beans, corn, deer, nuts, and maple syrup. However, in the southeast woodlands, many wild resources such as rice and bison were unavailable. The people relied more heavily on crops. The Cherokee in the southeast, for example, grew the three sisters of corn, beans, and squash. People of the southeast woodlands wore clothing that could be adjusted depending on the weather. Men wore a breechcloth, which is a long rectangular piece of deerskin cloth or animal fur. It was worn between the legs and tucked over a belt. Men in the southeast woodlands also wore leggings or leg pants, usually made from buckskin or some other soft leather. Women generally wore a deerskin top and a skirt to which they might add leggings, a cape, or a robe. Both men and women wore moccasins, soft-soled and heelless shoes. In hotter areas of the southeast, men wore little clothing and often tattooed their bodies. So here is a pair of moccasins, which are soft-soled, heelless shoes made by the Native Americans of the eastern woodlands. And they used animal skin to create these and make these moccasins. Ways of life varied from group to group in the southeast. The Cherokee, who lived mainly in what is now Tennessee and Georgia, constructed fairly large villages, with each having 20 to 60 houses and a large meeting building. Cherokee homes were usually made of wattle, twigs and branches woven together to make the house's frame, and daub, which is a sticky substance like mud or clay. The Cherokee covered the wattle frame with daub, which held it all together. This created the look of an upside down basket. The Cherokee also placed fences around their villages for protection against enemies. Each Cherokee village had its own leaders and made its own decisions. However, during the times of celebration or war, villages came together. One celebration, called the Green Corn Festival, honored the summer's first corn crop with dances and games. Like the Cherokee, the Natchez built homes from wattle and daub. The Natchez lived in permanent villages in what is today Mississippi. They were successful farmers, but they also hunted, fished, and gathered food from plants. Like the Hopewell and Mississippian people before them, the Natchez built ceremonial mounds. The Creek arranged their towns around a central town plaza, used for religious ceremonies and games. Surrounding the plaza were family homes built out of poles and covered with grass, mud, or thatch. Like the Cherokee, the Creek relied on the three sisters of corn, beans, and squash for food. In addition, they hunted small animals and gathered plants. All right, so continuing on with people of the Northeast Woodlands, so in the northern part of the United States. All right, like the Southeast Woodlands, the Northeast Woodlands area was populated by different groups, each with their unique customs and traditions. The Mohawk, Onondaga, Cayuga, Oneida, Seneca, Narragansett, and Pequot groups lived in the Northeast Woodlands. Because of differences in climate and terrain, people in the Northeast ate food unavailable to people in the Southeast. Rivers in the Northeast, for example, had annual runs of fish like salmon that moved up rivers from the sea. In the North, people often had to rely more on fish than on crops because frost frequently destroyed crops. On the Atlantic coast and along major rivers, shellfish were plentiful and provided a major source of food for the people living there. Because of the colder climate, the clothing worn by people in the Northeast differed from what people in the Southeast wore. While the basics, breechcloth and leggings for men and deerskin tops and skirts for women, remained the same, people in the Northeast wore heavier and warmer leggings and various furs. Northeast groups also used snowshoes for walking the snow. Snowshoes worked by distributing a person's weight over a larger area so that a person does not sink in the snow. So when I think of snowshoes, I think of like almost like tennis rackets. So they're like larger, your foot would stand on them, but it would distribute your weight in the snow so you didn't sink down. This is a wampum, or stringed shell beads, was used for ceremonial purposes and for trade. In the 1500s, the Iroquois lived mostly in what is now upstate New York. Historians call this group the Iroquois because they spoke languages in the Iroquoian language family. However, the Iroquois call themselves the Haudenosaunee. In Iroquoian, this means people of the longhouse. For housing, the Iroquois depended on wigwams and longhouses. The Iroquois made wigwams by bending young trees to form the round shape of a dome. Then, over this basic shape, they wrapped pieces of tree bark to protect against bad weather. Over the bark layer, they added thatch or dried grass. A small hole at the top allowed smoke from the fire to escape. Longhouses were long rectangular homes. The Iroquois made their longhouses by building a frame from saplings or young trees. They covered the frame with bark sewn together. Inside, they built a long hallway with rooms on both sides. Then they lined the walls with sleeping platforms covered with deerskin. They also built in shelves for storing baskets, pots, and pelts, which are the skins of animals with the fur attached. Several families lived in the same longhouse. Almost all the Iroquois property was controlled by clans, groups of families who shared the same ancestor. Women were the leaders of their clans. Among the Iroquois, it was women who decided how the land would be used and who would use it. When a man married, he moved into his wife's longhouse and lived with her family. Children took the clan name from their mother. No important decision could be made without the approval of the clan mother. Although the leaders from each village were men, it was the clan mother who chose them. Governments in the Woodlands. To help protect themselves, the Creek formed a confederacy. A confederacy is a group of people formed for a common purpose. The Creek Confederacy divided its towns into peace, white towns, and war, red towns. Red towns declared war, planned military action, and met with enemies. White towns passed laws and held conquered groups. However, during war, people in peace towns joined in the fighting. Farther north, the Iroquois also had a system of government. When they were a small group, they cooperated on many matters. By about AD 1300, their numbers had grown, and their communities were crowded. Arguments arose and fighting broke out. The Iroquois believed that if one person was wronged, it hurt the whole clan. For this reason, wrongs had to be punished. The Iroquois also fought with other eastern woodlands peoples, often over hunting grounds. Warfare soon became a constant problem for the Iroquois. According to the Iroquois history, two Iroquois leaders, Degawanida and Hiawatha, saw that fighting was destroying their people. In the 1500s, these two leaders urged the Iroquois to join together to make peace. In about 1570, 5 separate Iroquois groups joined together to form the Iroquois Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois League. The Confederacy is still active today. So this primary source here says, in their words, this is actually wording from the Constitution of the Iroquois Nation. So this is when they formed that Iroquois Confederacy. This is kind of like our Declaration of Independence, our Bill of Rights. These are the laws that they said in theirs. So it says, if a nation, part of a nation, or more than one nation within the 5 nations should in any way endeavor or to destroy the great peace by neglect or violating its laws and resolve to dissolve the Confederacy, such a nation or nation shall be deemed guilty of treason and called enemies of the Confederacy and the great peace. They, the offending people, shall be warned once. If a second warning is necessary, they shall be driven from the territory or the Confederacy. So what they're saying is that if one of those 5 nations that joined the Confederacy, if one of them did something wrong against one of the other ones, they would be considered an enemy of the Confederacy. And then if they had to get a second warning, they would be driven off of the territory of the Confederacy. All right, so if we look at this map, you can see the Iroquois Confederacy in 1600, and you can see those 5 nations that joined together. So we have the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Mohawk. And you can kind of see where they lived at in that northeastern part of the United States here. So let's look at the map skill. It says, which group of Iroquois lived the furthest east? All right, so let's think about this. If we have north up here, east, south, west, you can see that on our compass rose here. Which one of these Iroquois groups lived the furthest east? All right, just a little bit more on the Iroquois Confederacy. Let's go ahead and read through this. It says, does the Iroquois Confederacy resemble the U.S. government? So let's see if we can find some similarities or differences here. In order to keep the Great Peace, the Iroquois people developed the Great Law. This was a set of rules by which the Iroquois people lived. They also set up a way for each of the groups in the Iroquois Confederacy to have a voice in making decisions. Representatives from all of the clans met at the Grand Council. These representatives were chosen by clan mothers. The Grand Council made decisions through discussion and compromise, or settled a dispute by each side agreeing to give up part of what it wanted. The Grand Council continued to make decisions for the Iroquois today. Some historians believe that the Iroquois government influenced the plan of the American government. Like the Iroquois Constitution, the U.S. Constitution includes a system of checks and balances and a separation of powers. In fact, in 1988, the U.S. Senate passed a resolution acknowledging the influence of the Iroquois Confederacy on the U.S. Constitution. But just how much did the Iroquois Confederacy influence our government? How democratic was the Iroquois Confederacy?